Urgent! An emergency decree from Finland. A new front, something terrible is brewing. Russia is attacking Nato. This is no longer just words. And shock! Minsk is once again following the Kremlin's lead. An attack from Belarus. 100,000 soldiers are already on standby. The situation is heating up, but that's not all. Kyiv is wide awake and striking at the military lifeline of the Russian dictator. Harsh retaliatory strikes. Putin's defense industry has never been hit this hard before. Hello everyone, this is Ukraine Today. I'm Renata Stanova, bringing you the latest events. Urgent! The war between Russia and Finland is about to begin. In recent weeks, Russia has increased its military activity near the Finnish border. It is moving equipment and creating new military units. In response, the Finnish parliament made an unexpected decision. The country is withdrawing from the international convention banning anti-personnel mines. This effectively opens the door to the return of minefields along the border with Russia for the first time in many years. Experts from the West and Finland note that new military facilities are currently being actively built in Russia's border regions. For example, new buildings are appearing in a garrison just 110 kilometers from the Finnish border. Local authorities have confirmed that a military town for an artillery brigade is being established there. Reconstruction of old Soviet bases on the Karelian Isthmus is also ongoing. In Petrozavodsk, a new army headquarters is being built, barracks are being modernized, and new railway lines are being laid. There are plans to station several divisions there, with a total number that could reach tens of thousands of soldiers. The new railway routes are particularly noteworthy as they run close to the borders with Finland and Norway, as well as along the St. Petersburg-Estonia direction. These lines could be used to deliver equipment in the event of a conflict. Recently, satellite images captured the arrival of a train carrying new 152mm Malva self-propelled artillery units in Petrozavodsk. Finland's withdrawal from the Ottawa Convention, which bans anti-personnel mines, is seen by experts as a complicated move. A country that had long maintained neutrality has now become part of Nato and is returning to a strategy of defending its borders by all possible means. Permission to use mines makes it possible to create a reliable defense system in the northeastern direction. The increase in military activity in Finland is just one part of the major changes taking place along Russia's northwestern borders. These processes affect the entire Baltic region. Against the backdrop of the war in Ukraine and an increasingly complicated dialogue with NATO, Moscow's actions are more and more often seen as preparations for a possible military conflict with Western countries. While the world waits in anticipation of a possible escalation from Russia, Ukraine is already successfully repelling attacks from the aggressor. For example, the armed forces of Ukraine continue to carry out retaliatory strikes against the enemy on the front lines. For instance, Ukrainian defenders repelled a fierce attack on Kostiantynivka, turning the occupiers' armored vehicles into scrap metal. 18 armored vehicles and 13 motorcycles were completely destroyed along with their crews. Another 5 units sustained serious damage. The enemy is trying to encircle Ukrainian forces, aiming to minimize their own losses while storming this key city. Kostiantynivka is the heart of the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. Its capture would result in colossal casualties for the occupiers, just as it did in Bakhmut, where Russia lost about 100,000 men. For a year and a half now, they have been unsuccessfully assaulting Chasiv Yar. In the Toretsk direction, Russian troops launched a mechanized attack with at least a platoon. As a result, the Ukrainian armed forces destroyed about 15 pieces of enemy heavy equipment and around 8 quad bikes. Notably, anti-terrorist unit officers from the FSB in the Donetsk region have been redeployed to the Toretsk direction. In the Kramatorsk direction, fighting is taking place in Chasiv Yar for control over areas with private housing. Ukrainian forces are steadfastly holding their positions and successfully counterattacking. According to the Russian side, an entire FSB regiment has even been redeployed to Chasiv Yar, which indicates a severe shortage of operational reserves for the enemy. Meanwhile, the Ukrainian armed forces are striking the enemy not only at the front, but also behind the lines.
So the third one. He passed, went down below, descending, went on, and there was a flash with something there. The drone was blown up. The second one.
Drones are already routinely stirring things up. Just as planned, they made it 1,000 kilometers from Ukraine. The Russians are in shock. Orenburg, an important logistics and industrial center located near the border with Kazakhstan, is under attack. They're bombing Yasny. There are nuclear missiles there. Orenburg, Yasny, the location of the Russian strategic missile forces bases. Russians in the chats immediately wrote that explosions of unprecedented force hit the military unit.
Right now, in general, there are some explosions and shelling at the military unit. Right now, basically, in Yasny, everyone at the military unit is sitting in the basements because there are explosions and shelling, all sorts of stuff going on. Plus the cops, patrol police, and traffic police.
The locals are scared. They're frightened and can't understand what's happening around them.
I mean, how could you not be scared after hearing sounds like that? Right now, there are no planes flying. It's close by.
A Russian woman is asking what she should do next, and really what?
What am I supposed to do? Grab my sleeping child, get them dressed, get myself dressed. And where should I run? Everyone is going to be really scared.
For example, local Telegram channels are advising Russians to stock up on water, prepare charged power banks, and buy as many candles as possible. This doesn't really look like an optimistic scenario for how things might develop.
Take shelter in the nearest reinforced protective structure or in natural terrain fields. If you are sheltering in a non-hermetic protective structure or outdoors, you need to put on personal protective equipment.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
All the Telegram channels are reporting another powerful barrage of strikes, this time on Volgograd. There's a prime target for Putin located there. This is something phenomenal.
The second drone was blown up. The second one.
Today, the region was attacked by Ukrainian drones. The UAV struck directly at the military airfield. As we can see, Putin has no luck with airfields. Locals immediately leaked the first minutes after the powerful strike online. A real mess.
Can anyone tell me what's burning over there? I just can't see it, please. That smoke is really intense.
The governor of the Volgograd region announced that a massive UAV attack was repelled in 2 districts and in the southern part of Volgograd. According to him, the on-duty air defense systems of the Russian Ministry of Defense allegedly intercepted and neutralized all enemy drones. But honestly, you couldn't expect anything else from him. When it's necessary, who should be sent?
The panic is growing. Rosovetsi suspends airport operations. No flights from Volgograd or Kaluga. In Voronezh, Russians are without communication and internet.
Residents of Voronezh will have their internet cut off at the request of the security forces. The connection will go down not only during the threat of a drone attack. Russians are panicking. Now you can't even buy anything in the stores.
Do you have a card? Yes. With 2 in cash. Alright, so what should I ring up?
At the Ministry of Defense, as always, they pretend that the situation is under control. They say the air defense worked perfectly.
Air defense systems intercepted and destroyed 81 Ukrainian fixed-wing unmanned aerial vehicles.
After the attack, Russians on social media started competing to figure out what exactly delivered the devastating strike. Among the theories is the mysterious Cheklun drone.
The Ukrainian armed forces tried to attack Russian regions with Cheklun V-type drones, kamikaze drones similar to the Lyuti. According to SHOT, all the UAVs were launched from the Cherkasy region.
Russians are convinced that the warheads of the drones were loaded with 5 kilograms of plastic explosives.
In addition, homemade UAVs were used for the raid on Russian regions.
Meanwhile, as the front heats up, Moscow, trying to hide its failures there, resorts to new intimidation tactics. For example, it uses the territory of Belarus and disguises its true intentions under the guise of military exercises. This information was announced by the President of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, at the 3Seas summit. It remains unclear who exactly the new strike might be aimed at, towards Ukraine or at neighboring countries such as Lithuania and Poland. President Zelensky emphasized that the planned joint exercises between Russia and Belarus represent a serious threat that must be viewed with a focus on reality. He noted that similar exercises in the past have often turned out to be preparations for aggression against Ukraine. This could very well be repeated this time as well. The head of the Ukrainian state is urging neighboring countries to be prepared for possible challenges and threats. The exercises, called Zapad 2025, are scheduled for September, which, according to expert assessments, suggests that the first Russian troops could begin arriving in Belarus as early as July. Official data on the number of these troops has not yet been disclosed. However, sources within the Belarusian opposition suggest that the contingent could number as many as 100,000. The planned exercises may take place at key locations on the border of Belarus with Lithuania and Poland, as well as in the area where the borders of Ukraine, Poland and Belarus meet. If these exercises do indeed take place, it will force the European Union to mobilize its resources to counter potential threats. At the same time, Ukraine may be compelled to deploy its forces to defend its borders. Zelensky emphasized that the emergence of threats in this region will inevitably have consequences. If Ukraine has to move its reserves to the border with Belarus, this could weaken its ability to defend other, more vulnerable sections of the front. Many analysts point out that such exercises could be used as a cover for direct aggressive actions against neighboring countries. According to media reports, Belarus is trying to attract international observers to the Zapad 2025 exercises. In particular, representatives from Hungary and Slovakia may monitor the actions of the Union state. There were also observers at the exercises in 2021 who recorded Russia's plans to destabilize Ukraine. The presence of such observers can be used as a tool to put pressure on neighboring countries. Representatives of organizations opposed to Lukashenko claim that the Zapad 2025 exercises themselves do not pose a direct threat to the Baltics and Poland. However, Belarus's military power continues to grow. Experts believe that by 2028, Belarus will be able to produce significant quantities of weaponry, including rocket munitions and drones. NATO forecasts point to 2028 as a critical date for a possible confrontation with Russia. Nevertheless, Ukrainian analysts are less optimistic and predict that aggression could begin even earlier. Amid rising tensions, it is important for the international community to do everything possible to prevent both the exercises and any potential aggressive actions from Belarus. At the moment, Ukraine's partners do not have a unified opinion about the role Belarus is playing in the current conflict. Incidentally, questions about the likelihood of direct military involvement by Belarus have been discussed since the beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. However, according to the head of Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, Minsk is unlikely to be considered a serious military ally for the Kremlin. Belarus has small and poorly trained armed forces, and the country's economy is heavily dependent on Russia. In 2022, when Russia faced difficulties with armaments, Belarus gave it everything it could, from ammunition and equipment to body armor and machinery. Moreover, the Belarusian military-industrial complex is now actively producing ammunition that Russia needs. Approximately 80% of Belarusian defense industry enterprises are integrated into the Russian military industry, effectively making them a single entity. However, despite these factors, the scenario of a Russian army invasion through Belarus into Ukraine or other Baltic countries remains one of the most likely. The head of Germany's Federal Intelligence Service also warned about a possible Russian attack on NATO countries' territory and emphasized that the war against Ukraine is only part of the Kremlin's broader strategy to expand its influence. Amid growing threats, the Russian dictator Putin decided to comment on the possibility of war escalation, or more precisely, to lie once again. During a press conference, the Kremlin dictator called the idea that Russia might attack NATO countries nonsense.
The myth that Russia is planning to attack Europe, NATO countries, that is the very same unbelievable lie that they are trying to make the people of Western European countries believe. Well, we understand that this is nonsense.
He also stated that the presence of Russian troops near Kyiv and other Ukrainian cities was not due to an intention to occupy the country. Supposedly, Russia has no such goal. Against this backdrop, Putin and Xi Jinping held a phone conversation. The main topic was allegedly the war between Iran and Israel. However, in reality, Xi summoned Putin to China on August 31. And while Putin claims he does not intend to occupy Ukraine, Russia has concentrated nearly 700,000 soldiers on our country's territory. The commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, emphasized that the Kremlin plans to use this massive force to achieve its expansionist goals by the end of the summer. But the Ukrainian armed forces are preparing a devastating response. Strike units are already being formed. All the details are coming up next.
Russia has amassed nearly 700,000 troops in Ukraine. The Ukrainian army is changing its structure, and the armed forces of Ukraine will no longer remain in a purely defensive stance. Commander-in-Chief Oleksandr Syrsky spoke with journalists the day before and made several high-profile statements. The fact that Russia is preparing for a protracted war was now stated not just in theory but with concrete numbers. So last year, according to calculations by our general staff, the occupying army reached about 440,000 troops, and today it numbers approximately 695,000 people. At the same time, Syrskyi notes that Russia is also building up its reserves.
That's 13 divisions, a certain number of regiments and brigades, which adds another 121,000. In other words, they are preparing for a protracted war, a war of attrition. This is their main strategy. They want to overwhelm us with their manpower, to wear us down with their sheer numbers.
The army is indeed large, but considering the kind of war the Russian army is waging now, it is, of course, well, not large enough. If you raise the question of whether an army of this size, as it is now, is enough for Putin to defeat Ukraine, no, it is not enough.
At the same time, the Russians have completely different objectives, according to the commander-in-chief. This summer, the occupiers will mainly try to reach the administrative borders of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, as well as to create a so-called buffer zone in the Sumy region. Despite such reinforcements among the Russians, the Ukrainian armed forces will not simply sit in the trenches and defend themselves. Syrskyi announced that our troops will be moving out of a purely defensive posture. However, the directions, of course, are not being disclosed.
As for our plans and intentions, of course, we will not remain in a purely defensive posture, because that brings nothing and ultimately leads to us retreating anyway, losing people and territory. That is why we are combining defensive actions with active defense and active offensive operations. That is, wherever possible, we strike at the enemy, carry out counterattacks, and advance where we see weak points in the enemy's defenses.
At the same time, the first such weak spots have appeared in the Sumy region. According to the deep state resource, our troops launched an offensive there the day before and recaptured the village of Andriivka. Syrskyi also reminded that the Ukrainian armed forces still control part of the Kursk region, which continues to draw Russian units away and prevents them from freely advancing in the Sumy direction.
The Ukrainian army controls about 90 square kilometers of territory in the Glashkovsky district of Russia's Kursk region. These are our preemptive actions in response to a possible enemy offensive.
The commander-in-chief also spoke about the reorganization within the Ukrainian army. Thus, army corps have been preferred over the traditional operational commands, and this process is being actively implemented. According to Syrskyi, these changes will help save personnel, meaning our servicemen who are directly carrying out combat missions will be used more efficiently. In addition, it will allow for the creation of more capable reserves so that we have the ability to conduct active counteroffensive and offensive operations.
The first wave of Army Corps Command, along with their support units, has already completed combat coordination and taken over their designated areas of responsibility and assigned troop contingents. Next, the following wave will do the same, and in this way, all corps will take up their respective areas. In this way, we will complete the transition to a corps-based system and the corresponding restructuring of our defense.
According to military analysts' forecasts, such a reorganization will already provide new opportunities this year for the effective deployment of units, repelling the Russian offensive, strengthening control over brigades, reducing our losses, and increasing enemy losses.
That's all from me for now, at least for the moment, for now. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any of the hottest updates.